Firm of Bowen, McLeod and Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, bad news came from the north this week, both in sports and in the weather. One left us with high blood pressure. The other caused low water pressure. We'll examine both tonight, as well as the state's unemployment rate, the governor and the legislature facing a budget deficit again, and the Pelicans at midseason. And we'll examine the consequences of an early Mardi Gras. In the field for us are tonight's Informed Sources: ERROL LABORDE, producer of Informed Sources; Tyler Bridges, reporter, The New Orleans Advocate; CURT SPRANG, news anchor and reporter, WGNO TV Channel 26; and Jeff Duncan, sports columnist, NOLA.com, The Times-Picayune. Go over to CURT first, and oh, it was a chilly week.
I mean, for what, 72 hours? We had a miserable 72 hours in this city.
Sure did.
And I think the lesson that we're all learning moving forward is that some of the things that we do to protect ourselves during that time can cause additional problems down the road. You know, I think we've got severe issues with water pressure, and we're starting to slowly build our way out of that, build the water pressure back up in Orleans Parish on the East Bank, Jefferson Parish. You know, St. John the Baptist was telling all of its people, don't use the water at all. We've got to get water back. But, you know, it's from pipes freezing and breaking, and also from people leaving the water running so that they don't have that problem.
Which, of course, we are advised to do.
Which we are advised to do. And, you know, I think everybody may have a little different interpretation of what pencil thin means. You know, maybe that's part of the problem. You know, and also a situation like this is, as these pipes freeze, we don't see the problem entirely. We don't see the whole picture until they thaw.
Yes, I learned from that.
I'll say you
from
yourself.
Personal experience. I was one of the lucky ones.
And it's funny, you know, here we are, Informed Sources, and I think everybody has a pretty good idea what happened. You know, viewers as well, what happened the past 3 days and how difficult it has been. With the low water pressure, we're under a boil water advisory. That is not a quick fix because you have to get the water pressure back where it needs to be. Then you can test it and see when if there's any contamination of any problems in the water. And until then, you know, you've got businesses that are in trouble. We were out at the mall yesterday. We had a reporter out there interviewing a young woman who was just, she was off school. And she's, you know, this is day 3 in a row for her to be off school. She's like, well, gosh, I really need to do something. I came out here to eat at P.F. Chang's and get a prom dress. And guess what? Mall was closed, and so was P.F. Chang's.
Yeah, well, it impacted a lot of businesses, including our hotels and our airport.
Oh, can you imagine if you're flying in once the runways were cleared of any ice issues? If you're flying in and you're like, oh man, I need to find a restroom here pretty quickly. There aren't any. There were 2, I think, in the whole airport, and they weren't, I think, fully functional. And otherwise, they brought in portalets like Jazz Fest.
Yeah, they were run on portable toilets. Yeah.
There have been times when it's been this cold before, but there's something about the whole thing seems like it's worse in its own category. I'm trying to figure out how this was worse than anything we've experienced.
Yeah, in 2012, I think it was, we had that cold weather where the city said, you know what, we're shutting down the city. Mayor Landry shut down the city for days. You know, news crews, we were all staying in hotels and stuff. You couldn't get across the bridge then, whether it's the Twin Spans or the Causeway or I-55, just like this time around. But I don't recall a time when we had the problems with so many pipes bursting that we've had this time around.
Well, when I called my plumber, which was a Wednesday afternoon, he at that point said that he had 129 calls for service. That was Wednesday afternoon. When I checked on him again on Thursday saying, where are you? It had jumped to 300 calls for service.
Right.
And he said he'd just never seen anything like it.
And so the city is making it clear. I thought it was humorous because, well, Entergy first off said, hey, lay off the heat, folks, you know. we're worried about power issues. And then the city follows that up with, when Entergy says that they're worried about power issues, that's not affecting anything flood control related, you know, because we had that issue last year. But then they say, let's use the water sparingly. We've got to build up the pressure again. And then in the next breath, someone says, well, people are reporting having discolored water. Now that the water is thawing, which apparently can happen because of copper pipes having issues and things like that. And then the city says, yeah, just run your faucet for 5 minutes. That's the solution. And you're like, wait a second, the guy before you said, let's try to cut back on this. So, you know, it's not a quick fix. The mayor, the governor as well, say they expect by Monday for things to be back to normal, kids to be back in schools, the boil water advisories to be lifted.
Yeah, I remember in 1989 there was a freeze, and this was at Christmas week, in the days before Christmas, and it came from Texas of all places, the freeze. And that Friday morning, the city was frozen, and people from the city said, okay, everybody should go home. This is after everybody was already in their offices for the day. And so they said, everybody should go home. So you got this whole city all leaving at the same time with people driving who don't know how to drive in ice. I don't think we'd do that now. I think we've become a lot smarter about these things and about advising people about driving in ice and keeping them off the road.
And I think the school districts especially are realizing, look, we need to make this call the night before. What we don't want to do is get a bunch of kids at schools and then decide, oh, you know what? We're going to have an issue running buses this afternoon. We can't get these kids home. So I think that, and frankly, I think what the mayor did a few years ago was very proactive. In the same vein, I think the city says, you know what? This is going to be a really difficult few days, but it could be so much worse if we try to do we're going to just power through this mentality.
Well, as Errol said, people here are just not used to driving in icy conditions, obviously, so, you know, it's dangerous. And we saw major roadways closed all over. Yeah,
and it was difficult driving. The ice was patchy in many places. But I'll tell you this, just from my experience of living up north, they don't know how to drive there either. On that.
It's hazardous driving anywhere when you're driving on ice. Absolutely.
The other thing I've noticed the coverage is that this was all part of a huge winter storm all the way across to the east part of the country, and people are starting to cover these things like they cover hurricanes. Particularly, the Weather Channel is even giving these winter storms a name.
Right.
I mean, it's not the government that's giving those names; it's the Weather Channel, and so they're trying to build that same sort of, I guess, mentality about this, or maybe it's the same sort of drama to it.
Right.
But there's just more awareness, I guess.
Pretty soon they'll probably add categories or something to it. Who knows, like that, or pipes burst, some sort of a
gradation of it.
Yeah.
Analytics.
Exactly. Break it down.
Well, I hope this is our last Arctic blast for this winter. Yes, we have had some winter this year, and that's enough for most of us at any rate. Well, over to Jeff now. The only good thing about this Arctic blast is that it sort of took our attention away for a while from a heartache of last Sunday.
Yeah, that was an all-time heartbreaker, that game. Just to document how unusual it was the first time in the history of the NFL that a playoff game has been won on the last play of the game on a touchdown. So it's never happened before. We've never seen that type of stunning turnaround. And I think the reason it was so heartbreaking was the Saints had made what looked to be one of the greatest comebacks in the history of the franchise. I mean, they'd come back not once, but twice, 17 points down at halftime. They looked dead in the water, frankly, against the best defense in the league in a hostile environment. If you all have ever been up to this stadium in Minneapolis, it's an incredible environment. It's a lot like the Superdome. You can't hear yourself talk. And it was like that the entire game. This was a huge game for the Minnesota Vikings. Their tortured history, their fans know that they have a chance to make it to the Super Bowl, be the first team ever to play in the Super Bowl on their home field. So they were all in. And for the Saints to come back the way they did, kick a field goal with 25 seconds left, and then the inauspicious way the drive started for Minnesota with they got one first down, then there were a couple of penalties, a couple of incompletions, and it just looked like they were going nowhere. For them to complete that pass, it stunned everybody. It stunned the Saints, it stunned the Vikings, it stunned the crowd. I mean, there were thousands of fans after the game just sitting in their seats. They didn't know what to do. I mean, they didn't want to leave because they weren't quite sure what they'd just seen.
Jeff, what happened on that play with the safety? Why was he out of place?
Well, he was in place. He just pursued the play. He's a 21-year-old rookie. I mean, he's a young player on the biggest stage of his career, and he just made a mistake. I mean, it was a horrific mistake considering he's the only last line of defense. That's his number one priority, is to not let anybody get behind him, and to just completely whiff on the tackle. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that. I haven't seen anything like that. It was just one of those things that happens in sports. You can't describe it. I think the pressure of the moment, the fact that he ran from a long distance, covered a lot of ground, and he was scared to interfere. The Saints had already had 3 pass interference calls in the game, and with an interference penalty on the defense at that time, even if the clock runs out, they still allow them to kick a field goal. The game cannot end on a defensive penalty. So he was fearful of that. He's being very cautious, and I think just kind of overanalyzed everything while he's moving 100 miles an hour. That's the best way I could describe what happened.
So you were there among the players, the coaches. I mean, what was it like, really? And we see coverage of it. How would you really describe, how were they feeling?
They were devastated. I mean, they really were in shock. I think I can honestly say that, and that doesn't happen a lot in the NFL. These players, a lot of them have been through some heartbreaking losses, but never one like that. I mean, players were congratulating each other on the sidelines before the play. Sean Payton, of course, was mocking the Vikings fans with their skull chant. He was doing this clap to the crowd. Everyone thought the game was over, and the Saints were going to pull off this incredible victory. And I was devastated because I picked the Saints to win 25-23, and it was 24-23. I was going to look like a genius. And then the last second play that we'll never forget. I don't think we'll ever forget that, and I assume Marcus Williams will get past it, but I've talked to a couple players that have retired, and they say these kind of plays will haunt you. You'll think about them every day of your life because you were so close. And the Saints, I think, also knew they were one game away from the Super Bowl if they win against a very vulnerable Philadelphia team. There's just a great opportunity there that was lost. And
they worked so hard to get there, and these opportunities just don't come often.
Right. Thomas Morstead, the punter, was talking about that this week. And he said, just think back to 2006. He wasn't on that 2006 team, but that team went to the NFC Championship game. I think everybody in New Orleans thought, wow, here we are. We're going to be even better next year. And there were 2 straight years of missing the playoffs. It took them 2 or 3 more off seasons to get back to the Super Bowl in 2009. So it just doesn't magically happen. Chemistry's different. The locker room's different. There's going to be probably some coaching changes, and you just don't know. You don't know how young players react to success.
Injury to a key player.
Right.
Yes, I brought that up. I mean, I'm sure this time a year ago, Green Bay was thinking we're going to be back in the playoffs and maybe have a chance at the Super Bowl. Aaron Rodgers blows his shoulder out, and they have a losing season. So you just don't know.
But we do have a good chance next year, other than these things
Well,
happening.
right?
In terms of the talent that's there. And
yes. The core of this team, I mean, Drew Brees is the leader, and he should be back. I mean, I'd be stunned if he signs elsewhere. Matter of fact, I don't even think we should even talk about that because I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, he wants to be back. The Saints want him back. Obviously, that's the biggest offseason news for the Saints and the priority on the to-do list. But the other 5 Pro Bowlers on the team are all under contract. And the core of this team, the strength of it, are the last 2 draft classes. So we're talking players, rookies and second-year players, very young, that are cheap, relatively speaking, in the NFL salary cap world. So this team has a window of opportunity now, and I think Drew Brees knows that. And so I think that's going to get him back here more than ever because he realizes he can end his career where he wants to end it with another Super Bowl.
Okay, so we look forward to next year, and just thanks for a great season this go-round, even though it was just a heartbreak.
It was a surprisingly successful season, and I think people should be encouraged for the future.
But Jeff, in the end, can anybody get past New England?
Sure. I think Minnesota's a team of destiny. I think if Minnesota gets...
You heard it here.
If Minnesota gets in there against New England, it's going to be a home game, basically, on their home field. I like their chances.
Seemed like somebody big is on their side with the way they won this
That
last
was also
one,
the home game we should have had because we applied for that game.
Exactly.
Stole our Super Bowl.
Okay, all right, Jeff, thanks a lot. Over to Tyler now. And once again, we've been here before. It's like a broken record, really. Fiscal cliff. We're facing it again of $1 billion in the state level deficit.
Yeah, the state's had fiscal budget problems for years and years, and the legislature and the governor have not been able to solve it since they all took office in January of 2016.
So what's going to be done? I mean, we're facing this enormous deficit of $1 billion. How is the governor approaching this?
Governor is saying that it's going to require new revenue, and the Senate will go along with that, which is controlled by under the Republicans, and the issue is the House Republicans. That's the big question. The governor has said, all right, I've put forth a plan that he's embraced a plan that was put forth by a blue ribbon commission that said, let's close a bunch of tax breaks that mostly benefit businesses and the wealthy. And then the House Republicans are saying, no, we're opposed to that, and we went through this last year with the legislative session. And then the governor's been saying to them, well, what do you want to do? You want to make cuts. You don't want to raise taxes. What will you cut? And the House Republican leadership has not come up with that. They have not offered a plan to match their words for cuts, and that's the stalemate right now. And Monday is going to be an important day to see what happens.
And that's when the governor is going to submit his budget? Is that
two things are going to happen on two things are going to happen on Monday. One is the governor is going to offer his budget. People are calling it the doomsday budget that will not have that $1 billion, and programs like TOPS will not be funded. And also the governor is asking the House Republican leadership to show that they have some sort of plan that the two sides can come to an agreement on to call a special session, because this is an even-numbered year. The legislature cannot raise taxes unless they do it in a special session. When would that special session take place? It would either take place before the regular session, which begins on March 12th, or after the regular session ends in early June. The fear is if that special session takes place in June and the budget has to be passed by July 1, that there just may not be enough time. So in some ways, Louisiana could be heading down the same path that Washington is heading down right now if the two sides cannot come together.
And that extra penny sales tax that was passed a couple of years ago, that falls off, right?
Right. That falls off on June 30th. That's why the timeline I described is important, that there's $1 billion in temporary taxes that last for 27 months, and that expires on June 30th, that the legislature passed when he took office, when John Bel Edwards took office, to solve the problem that Bobby Jindal and the preceding legislature had left behind. So the governor's saying, hey, I'm putting forth my plan. House Republican leadership, you can't just say no to everything. What is your plan?
Seems like TOPS is always used as a tool, as a negotiating tool, because everybody knows that's the one thing that's really popular. Do you think we'll ever get to the point where the governor and legislature would allow TOPS to just not be funded?
No, it's too popular. It's particularly, that's one of the government programs, for example, that Republicans really, really want.
Well, the governor wants it too. He doesn't want to cut it back either. So
no, yeah, and he's going to be presenting a budget on Monday. It's going to put him in a very uncomfortable position where he's putting forth a budget that he really doesn't want to pass, and he's going to be presenting an alternative budget if the legislature did come up with that $1 billion through perhaps some combination of cuts and new taxes or new revenue to fully fund programs, including TOPS.
And TOPS, those cuts that the governor is putting forth, have heard as much as 100%. In other words, it just wouldn't exist anymore.
Yes,
if that would happen.
That's the blueprint that he's saying, all right, legislature, if you don't want to come up with specific cuts and new revenue, then this is the budget you're going to have. And no one wants that budget. I'm confident to say that.
Okay, well, we'll be talking a lot about this in the months to come. Thanks a lot, Tyler.
Yeah.
Errol, early Mardi Gras.
It is. It's relatively early, and it has been earlier, but it's February 13th. And the early indications are that the tourism is going to be down a little bit this year. There's good news and bad news. The bad news is that because it's earlier, there's going to be fewer spring breakers coming. The good news is that because it's earlier, there are going to be fewer spring breakers coming. That kind of goes both ways. That some people could just as soon do without the spring break crowd and have more of a subdued carnival. The other thing is that this being the tricentennial, I think people were hoping that maybe the tricentennial would give a boost. I think the tricentennial is going to help tourism in that it's getting New Orleans free publicity, like with that New York Times article last year. But it's not publicity towards any one key event or moment that's going to draw people. It's just New Orleans and making people aware of it. I don't know if many people are going to say, well, I want to go to the Mardi Gras because of the tricentennial. And other than, I'm not that aware of that many tricentennial related events during Mardi Gras. Rex is going to have a theme related to it, and a few of the other Carnival crews, but I don't know if it's going to be that much of a draw into itself. So I think this is going to be an okay Carnival. You know, a lot of people will say, well, Carnival should be for the local people anyway, and it is, but tourism certainly helps justify government spending on police and sanitation and everything else, and so you need that also.
What are hotels saying right now? Do we know in terms of, you know, rooms being booked, et cetera?
Yeah, I don't think they're expecting anything like sellouts or anything. But you know, kind of the subtle tourism that people don't see is that there's some parades, especially the bigger parades, like an Orpheus parade, that have a lot of out-of-town riders. They have a lot of out-of-town groups, people organized in Houston and Dallas, and they bring a lot of people. There's one of those crews that pretty much rinse out the Royal Sonesta. And so those are the people that come in, and they're not your typical kind of tourists. I mean, you see them on floats throwing stuff at you, and so they're now out there in the streets. And so that type of tourism is still growing.
Okay, Mardi Gras, not too far away.
Not too far away.
Not at all. All right, thanks a lot, E. Back over to Tyler, and you're doing a piece about the state unemployment rate, which really isn't quite what it seems.
Right. John Bel Edwards lately has, every month when the state unemployment rate figures come out, he's been trumpeting the fact that the state unemployment rate has gone down. In fact, from when he took office in January 2016, the unemployment rate in Louisiana has gone from 6.2% to 4.7%. And he makes it sound good. He makes it sound like more people are working. But actually, I dug into the numbers. And there's actually 8,000 fewer people working today in Louisiana than when he took office. So, well, how is it possible that the unemployment rate has gone down substantially and yet fewer people are working? What's happened is the unemployment rate is the division of the labor pool, the number of workers looking for jobs, and then the number of people who are working. And what happened is a lot of people have left the labor force since he took office. A lot of people probably left the state. We don't know exactly what happened. In fact, Louisiana is one of just a small number of states where the population went down in 2017. So where the governor's making it sound like it's a great thing that the unemployment rate has gone down, and in some ways that is good, actual numbers show that there's fewer people working today, about 8,000 fewer than when he took office in January of 2016.
But haven't we seen governors kind of play with statistics before? I mean, Bobby Jindal would make speeches that made Louisiana sound like the most prosperous state in the nation. And when you looked at those figures, they didn't always hold up.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the reasons, for example, that John Bel Edwards and the legislature inherited such a big budget problem was playing games with the numbers, and sure. And that's why I wanted to do the story for The Advocate, was to look at the real numbers. And again, it shows that while the unemployment rate has gone down, the economy is not as healthy as the governor would make it seem out to be.
So these workers that we have lost, there's 8,000 that are no longer in the labor pool, do we know what industries really have taken the hit of losing these workers?
Yeah, well, actually, a lot of it is in the oil industry, which is no great surprise. Right. Yeah, this said that the state's economic picture is not as good as the governor says. And actually, the economists I talked to said even a governor didn't have that much of an impact on the state's economy anyway. You know, all governors want to take credit when jobs are created, a new plant, unemployment rate's down. But the economists I talked to said, well, the governor doesn't have very much to do with that.
And this unemployment rate is still higher than the national average, right? Our state, such as it is.
Right. Yeah. And in fact, just to mention that, the national unemployment rate is down, and that helps Louisiana. Actually, the unemployment rate is down around the world.
All right, Tyler. Thanks a lot. We'll go over to Jeff, and now we're going to finish up talking about basketball, since now our focus is a little bit off of football. We're still not over it yet, but basketball. How's it looking mid-season?
Well, we always turn our attention to the Pelicans once the Saints season's over, unfortunately over a little earlier than everybody wanted. The Pelicans, I mean, they're exactly where we were last time we were on the program talking. They're right around 500. They're 23-21. So if you're looking at it optimistically, they are over 500, and it looks like they will make the playoffs. We're a little over halfway through the season. But I still think people are frustrated here. I don't think they've captured the city's attention because of their inconsistency. Last week was a prime example. They go to Boston, beat a team that's got the best record in the NBA, the best record in the Eastern Conference, on their home court, a team that won 7 games in a row. And then the next night they lose to the Atlanta Hawks after having a 15-point lead at halftime. They have the worst record in the Eastern Conference. So these, extremes, these inconsistencies, I think not only frustrate the coaching staff and the ownership and management, but I think it's alienated the fan base because no one can buy in. You can't buy in. The longest winning streak the team's had is 3 games all year. They've done that 3 times, and they've fallen flat on their face once they get to that 3-game winning streak, right when everybody starts getting kind of excited.
So, Jeff, do you think the franchise will stay, can survive here?
Yeah, I think it will. I think what'll be interesting to see is if it stays under the umbrella of the Bensons, if they keep it out there on Airline Drive and keep control of that team. That wouldn't surprise me, and I'm talking down the road, like maybe 5 years, 10 years, if they eventually sell it. Because I think the best thing that happened to the Pelicans was Tom Benson buying the team and keeping it here locally. But I think it was also one of the worst things that happened because, frankly, they're kind of like a farm club to the Saints. They're not the top priority. And everyone out on Airline Drive would argue and say otherwise, but it's the reality of the situation. Mickey Loomis is the general manager of both organizations, but he doesn't really turn his attention fully to the Pelicans till the Saints season's over. And that's a unique situation in the NBA. No other teams like that.
So back to their play. I mean, why the inconsistency?
Well, they've got a young lineup, and I know that's another excuse we hear all the time, but I think it really falls on the head coach to get these players to play consistently. And I think it falls on the 2 leaders of the team, Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins, to be more consistent. But we do have to remember, these are still young guys, 24 years old for both of them.
So the next half, you think they'll start hitting their stride,
Hey,
be a
no,
little
I'm
more
not-
consistent?
I'm
You're
not banking
predicting?
on the
Okay.
Pelicans.
You
Well,
predicted the Vikings are going to win the
You were
Super
that
Bowl.
close.
Yes, I'm going on a limb there. I'm not on the Pelicans bandwagon just yet.
All right, time to look ahead. Hey.
Well, ever since Lundegaard started in 1987, the Rex arrival has always been at the same place, and that's at the stage at Spanish Plaza by Riverwalk. This year, because of construction, they got to move the location a little bit further upriver between Riverwalk and the Convention Center at Julia Street. So it's going to be a different location. It's going to change things a little bit, but it's going to happen.
Okay. Tyler.
Yeah, Monday it'll be an important day with what's going on in the legislature and the governor presenting his doomsday budget. Those budget cuts, if they ultimately went through, would affect every single Louisianian. And if they come up with new taxes or renew, for example, some of the sales tax, ultimately, if they figure that will affect everybody as well.
Yeah, the unemployment piece that's coming out, is that this weekend?
Yeah,
Okay.
in the Advocate.
All right. Kurt.
Ian Somerhalder, a homegrown actor, now very famous, has purchased a big piece of land in St. Tammany Parish. He's having a fundraiser tomorrow night for his Ian Somerhalder Foundation. Expect an announcement from him in the weeks ahead on what he's going to do with that property. Probably going to have a lot to do with helping animals and helping the environment, both big causes for him.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kurt. Jeff.
Well, one of the feel-good stories that's occurred this week out of that Saints loss was the online grassroots donations by the Minnesota Vikings fans to Thomas Morstead, the Saints punter, who showed great valor in playing hurt in the game. His foundation has taken over $200,000 in donations from Minneapolis area residents. Now they're going to launch one here for the Children's Hospital. You can go online, wygwg.org. What You Give Will Grow is the name of Thomas Morstead's foundation. Saints fans can start maybe beating the Vikings off the field because they couldn't beat them on them.
Good cause. All right. Thanks, guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us. See you next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
The firm of Bowen, McLeod & Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.